Welcome to the realm of science fiction, where imagination knows no bounds and extraordinary stories unfold. Enjoy the adventure.
Smoke drifted in thin ribbons across the wreckage, ghosting over splintered trees and the scorched hull of what once might have flown. Daren stepped through the cracked underbrush, one boot crunching over blackened leaves, the other careful not to disturb a half-buried insignia glinting under ash. The distress beacon pulsed somewhere ahead, soft and steady, but that wasn't what led him. Not entirely. Instinct tugged harder than protocol. Then he saw her. She was curled beneath twisted plating, one leg pinned, her chest rising in quick, uneven bursts. Her armor was fractured chest plate dented, shoulder seal cracked open like an old wound. The Velari helmet hissed with each breath she took, the inner filters trying and failing to compensate. He dropped to one knee beside her. "Hold on," he murmured, voice low, almost apologetic. His fingers moved automatically, searching for the release points along the side of the mask, but they were fused. The emergency panel melted down into the joint. She stirred. Not much, just a slight shift, like a pulse that didn't want to be noticed. Her head turned away, barely perceptible. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. "No protocol, just breath. Let me help." The glow from her chest plate pulsed once runes shifting from violet to a warning red. Conscious, injured, withholding trust, he swallowed. Her breathing was too shallow. The filters weren't clearing the heat toxins from the crash fire. He had to get the helmet off. He braced her head gently, fingers curling against the curve of the cranial seal. She flinched, barely a twitch, but enough. Not unconscious. Not unfeeling. "It's okay," he whispered again. "I promise." The last fuse snapped under the twist of his tool. A faint click gave way to sudden stillness, and then he saw her. The helmet came free with a breathy release, and beneath it, a face framed in strands of pale hair, bloodied at the hairline, luminous skin streaked with soot and bruising. But it wasn't the damage that stopped him, Dot. It was the scars, dot lines like lightning, curved down from her temple, branching across her cheek in jagged symmetry. Marks that hadn't come from this crash. Older, healed, intentional, Dot, not disfigurement, not battle-honor, Dot, something else. She turned her face away, instinctive and silent, but not before their eyes met hers, silver-flecked and fierce with humiliation, or fear, or both, Dot, and still, he couldn't look away. Moonlight traced the lines on her skin, catching every ridge, and turned like star trails on a night map. And in that moment, something in him twisted not with pity, with awe. He forgot the words he was supposed to say, forgot the training, the report he'd have to write, the rule about not getting close. "You single quotes, read ... She froze. He caught his breath, held it, let it go slow. Beautiful. Her eyes widened just slightly. The pulse of her resonance, barely there, flickered across the air like heat shimmer. For a breath, a heartbeat, a chance. And then she turned her head sharply, eyes narrowing, fingers reaching for the helmet he still held in his hands. But she didn't take it. She didn't speak. She just looked at him like she was seeing something she shouldn't, and the space between them pulled tight as string. Then she was gone. Limping but moving, vanishing into the black beyond the wreck, like smoke escaping light. He sat there for a moment longer, the mask still warm in his hands, heart drumming like distant thunder. Not from fear. From something else. The scars caught. The moonlight before anything else did. Lightning shaped thin but deep, cutting from her temple across her cheekbone and down along her jaw, as though someone had once tried to carve her open, and the skin refused to forget. They shimmered faintly. Like glass beneath frost, Daren froze, not out of shock. Not disgust, just wonder. The moment hit like a held breath, sharp and fragile. He had expected pain. Yes, maybe even blood. But this wasn't that. This was older, etched, permanent. She turned away in an instant, like a flame reacting to wind. Her hair fell across her face, long and pale, streaked with smoke and ritual beads. The beads clicked softly as they swung, a sound that felt too delicate for the silence between them. "I didn't mean to. Don't speak." Her voice was clipped, but something in it faltered on the edges like a blade hitting bone. Controlled, but shaking. Daren didn't move, didn't try to correct himself. She was already reaching slow, defensive for the helmet now resting useless in the dust. But before she could touch it, their eyes met again, just for a second. And something in the air rippled, heatless but visible, light the way light shimmers. On a road in the middle of summer, The shimmer wasn't coming from the crash. It came from her resonance, he realized. A Velari's emotional field, reacting without consent. She clenched her jaw as if willing it back into stillness. But the echo of it remained warmth, curling just beneath his skin, pulsing against. The air between them, he wasn't supposed to feel it. That shimmer was a private thing, sacred even, but he did. And maybe she did too. He exhaled slowly, barely a sound. The helmet sat untouched between them. I see them, he said quietly. Her posture tensed, ready to run, ready to fight. He didn't know. They're not shame, he added. They look like survival. She didn't answer. Didn't argue. Just stared at him, wide-eyed, uncertain. Then her fingers twitched once, hovered over the helmet, and still. She turned again, hiding her face fully this time. But she didn't put the helmet on, didn't speak, didn't run. She just stood there, back to him, the weight of silence pressing between two people who had no language for what had just been shared. And for a flicker of a moment, Daren wished she hadn't turned away, not because of the scars, but because of what they revealed. When she let him see them, the night held stillness like a held breath, thick with the scent of scorched soil and something faintly floral burned ritual oil. Maybe clinging to the edges of her armor. Daren hadn't noticed how close they were until her eyes met his again, and the space between them shrank the width of a single breath. He hadn't meant to speak, but the words slipped out, low and quiet, like they belonged to the silence. You're beautiful. Her body didn't move, but everything else did. The field around her of Velari's emotional presence, usually invisible and tightly controlled, shivered outward. It was like standing too close to heat that hadn't yet scorched, a ripple of sensation that danced just along his skin and then vanished. She inhaled sharply, and he felt it not just as air, but as resonance brushing the edges of thought. She was staring at him now, wide-eyed, not with fury, but something far more dangerous. Confusion? Fracture. No one had ever said that to her. He didn't have to ask, he knew. Her breath caught again, but she didn't pull away. Not yet. His own heart thudded slow, deliberate, like the pacing of something sacred. It echoed into the moment, and he wondered if she could feel it. Can you feel it too? He didn't reach for her, didn't dare, but he didn't move back either. Neither did she. They were sharing air now, unintentionally, unmistakably. And that, in Velari culture, was not nothing. It was everything, an intimacy bound by ritual, by law. One more breath, and it might not just be closeness. It might be bond. She blinked once. Her lashes trembled. Her hand hovered, then curled into a fist by her side. And then slowly, she stepped back. The connection snapped like a thread pulled too tight. No sound. No words. Only the sharp withdrawal of her field, the retreat of warmth from the air between them. She turned just slightly. Enough to hide her face, not enough to erase the moment. He didn't call her back. He just stood there, throat dry, chest open, and wondered what it had cost her to stop. Daren stayed kneeling as she stood. His hands, still faintly trembling, hovered just above the crushed earth, where her weight had pressed a delicate imprint into the ash. She held her helmet under one arm, her face a careful blank, but the silence between them still pulsed like something alive. She didn't speak again. Not a thank you, not a warning, not a command. But as she turned, he caught it, that half-second hesitation, that near imperceptible tilt of her head, not enough to count as a glance back, just enough to betray the war happening beneath her skin. The wind shifted, rushing past him in a low sigh, carrying her scent in its wake-sharp minerals, something herbal, grounded and earthy, not perfume, nothing artificial, but unmistakable. Like crushed roots under rain, he closed his eyes and breathed in slowly, letting the scent linger, burn, fade. Then she was gone. No footfalls, no echo. Just the whisper of movement swallowed by night. That it didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like standing on the edge of a current he didn't understand, but couldn't stop wanting to follow. Back at the base, he wrote his report like a man trying not to lie while omitting every truth that mattered. Injury assessment, moderate. Velari operative, stabilized, departed unaided. No verbal exchange of note. He didn't write about her scars. He didn't mention how close they'd been, how close their breath had come to binding. He didn't describe the shimmer that passed over her field when he said the word beautiful. That moment wasn't for the record. That night, sleep refused to come gently. When it finally did, It carried him straight into the dream. A field of stars so bright they painted her skin. Her eyes glowing, not from injury or power, but from something he didn't have a name for. And the scars, they didn't mar her. They marked her dot like war paint, like poetry written in silence. He reached for her in the dream. And this time, she didn't turn away. The summit roster blinked across Daren's tablet, line by line, until a single name landed like a stone in still water. Commander Elira VASH. Tactical Liaison, Velari Dominion. He didn't scroll past it, didn't move at all. The name sat there, centered and quiet, but it pulsed in his chest like a secret. Trying to wake. He hadn't expected her to still be stationed here. Certainly not reassigned anything with diplomatic visibility. But there she was, official, embedded, inevitable. His eyes lingered too long. His thumb hovered just above the screen, but he didn't tap. Didn't need to. He wasn't reading anymore. He was remembering. Elsewhere in the compound, Elira sat in her quarters, spine straight, hands balanced on her knees. The meditation mat beneath her was woven from temple grasses, designed to ground the resonance, field through pressure points. But her mind was drifting. UNMOORED. Her breath was even. Her body, still. But beneath the surface, thought twisted like a current dot. She saw his eyes again. That moment when her helmet came off, when the shame carved into her skin had no place left to hide. She had braced for pity, revulsion, the diplomatic horror of a human who didn't understand what the scars meant. But he had only looked, and stayed. His voice still echoed somewhere in her chest. Not loud, just real. They're beautiful. A soft breath caught in her throat. Not enough to break form, but enough that she knew she wasn't really meditating anymore. She pressed her palms harder to her knees. Tried to silence the flicker. In her chest, that ripple, that tremor dot, she had felt it just for a moment when he spoke. Her resonance field had twitched, loosened, as if reaching toward his without permission. Was it an echo? A flaw in her control? Or had his voice his? Being truly stirred something in her that had long since been sealed? She opened her mouth, closed it. Then, on the next exhale, she whispered his name like it was a secret she wasn't ready to give away. Daren. The sound barely touched the air, but it stayed in her mouth like heat after a flame-sharp, unexpected. Soft around the edges. She opened her eyes slowly. The silence around her remained undisturbed, but inside, something shifted, and it would not be still again. The stillness was wrong. Elira sat in the center of her quarters, knees folded beneath. Her, spine straight, hands resting lightly on her thighs. The light filtering through the narrow vent screens painted soft lines across the floor, dull gold on dark stone. Her eyes were closed. Her breath controlled, in, hold, out, again. But the air inside the room hummed, too full. Her chambers were calibrated to ritual temperature, tuned for clarity and calm. Yet today, the walls seemed to pulse. She felt the weight of heat pressing at her collarbone, collecting at the base of her throat like unspoken words. Stillness is survival. That had always been the lesson. But her thoughts refused to stay still. His eyes wouldn't leave her. Not the color or shape, but the way they had looked. When her helmet broke and her shame was bare, when the scars twisted like stone rivers down her face, he hadn't turned away. He hadn't pitied her. He'd stayed. He'd seen her and called her beautiful. The word echoed. Her fingers twitched. Where they rested, small, involuntary, enough to break the symmetry of her form. She rebalanced, tried again, breath in, breath out. But already, her inner field had begun to stir small tremors beneath her skin, a resonance she couldn't fully suppress. She swallowed and opened the cum terminal beside her mat. Her fingers hovered briefly, then typed the request. Subject: tactical reassignment avoidance justification. Emotional residue: trauma adjoining presence. She marked it clinical, distant, a nothing breach, a procedural shield. But her pulse said otherwise. Still, she submitted it. Still, she sat, and still. She dreamed, not of the tribunal that shattered her command, not of her sister's execution beneath a red sun, not of cold-eyed elders reciting codes. She dreamed of him, of the sound in his voice, low, startled, gentle. They're beautiful. Of the air between them trembling like the breath before a kiss. The heat returned soft this time. Not painful, not overwhelming, just there. Like warmth rising from cupped hands. Her resonance pulsed again, this time without violence. It didn't scorch. It warmed Dot, and for a moment, just a moment, she let it stay. Not because she was weak, because something inside her whispered that heat wasn't danger. Dot. It was proof that she was still alive. Daren told himself he was only reviewing the personnel manifest, checking rotations, cross-species clearances, security tags. Just doing his job. But his eyes kept catching on one line. Commander Ilera V. ASH. No photograph. Just a name in slate gray font, sitting with quiet finality between two other Velari officers he'd already forgotten. He scrolled past it, then back, and again there was a redaction in her record. One disciplinary mark. It didn't say what for, just a code, sealed under higher clearance than he had. The rest of her file read like an honors reel: commendations, successful command deployments, tactical citations. He knew she had fallen. The scars were proof of that. Dot, but there was no mention of them. No note of the tribunal. No trace of what it had cost her to be reassigned. Only her name. He leaned back in his chair, head tilting against the cool bulkhead wall of the liaison office. The summit was 2 floors above, humming with preparation. He should have been upstairs, present, focused. She was here, somewhere in this base. Assigned, active. Dot, and the weight of that pressed against his ribs like heat trapped beneath skin. He remembered the way she turned away when he called her beautiful. The way her breath had caught. The shimmer in the air, barely visible, like light bending at the edge of heat. Dot, it hadn't just been proximity. It had meant something. He turned back to his screen and opened the cross-cultural protocol database. He didn't know what he was looking for. Just something, anything to make sense of that moment. Eventually, he found it. A subsection, buried in the back of the Ritual Intimacy Index. Shared breath thresholds of recognition. His throat went dry as he read. The passage was clinical, almost sterile, but its meaning cut like a live wire. To share unfiltered breath, within range of psychic proximity, was, in Velari culture, a ritual of profound implication reserved only for blood-bonded kin, ritual partners, or those initiating resonance. Daren's pulse stumbled. Dot, he hadn't meant to share anything. It had just happened, but had she felt it too? Had her field reacted because she'd wanted it to? He closed his eyes. Her face surged forward behind the dark, her gaze, her scars, the stillness that had looked so much like fear, until he realized. It was restraint. Was that real for her too? He whispered. Dot, the question stayed unanswered, but his chest already ached with the weight of knowing. Dot, it was. And that truth left him feeling both anchored and impossibly adrift. The drill began in chaos, deliberate, constructed, but still sharp around the edges. Sirens pulsed overhead, warning lights painting the corridor in red and orange. Voices shouted through coms and clipped bursts. The synthetic smoke smelled faintly of burned circuitry and iron oxide, close enough to reel to draw instinct to the surface. Daren ducked under a half-collapsed beam, his eyes already scanning for the first marker. The simulation was designed for disorientation, for urgency. It worked. Ilera moved beside him, fluid, silent, all lines and precision. She never wasted motion. Her steps were exact, hands executing the drill commands like ritual. Not slow, not rushed, just clean. They weren't supposed to be paired. The assignment algorithm had been randomized, or maybe not. He hadn't asked. They spoke only what protocol required. Zone 3 compromised. Stabilizer needed. I've got it. Her voice cut through the noise, sharp, efficient. Then the rupture warning triggered. Gas leak simulation. Elevated. Risk zone. A dummy casualty dropped into the red-lit corridor ahead of them. No time for hesitation. They lunged together. Their hands collided on the same stabilizer unit, fingers brushing across synthetic grip foam. Glove to glove. Nothing bare. But Ilera flinched like she'd touched an open flame. Not a full recoil, just a pulse that shook her field, just enough for Daren to feel it. Like standing near a speaker and catching the bass in your ribs. He didn't pull back. Neither did she. They completed the lift without a word, guiding the weight of the dummy between them, boots slipping slightly on the polished floor. Her jaw was set, her gaze fixed straight ahead. He watched the line of her throat as she breathed, steady but strained. Measured. As they cleared the red zone and set the dummy down. He saw it. Her breathing pace shifted. It sensed to his. Small, at first barely perceptible. But he'd seen it before in Velari medical training. Breathing rhythm was subconscious. It mirrored only under specific conditions. Bond, tension, recognition. Velari didn't mirror humans unless something in them wanted to. The air between them thickened, no longer charged by the simulation, but by something quieter and far more dangerous. She didn't speak, didn't meet his eyes, but her field vibrated, just a little like a chord, plucked too gently to echo, yet loud enough for someone listening closely. He was listening, and though he said nothing, though he turned to move on like the exercise, still owned him. Part of him stayed in that corridor, right where her breath had started to match his, and her silence had started to mean stay. The temple garden smelled like memory. Sacred moss clung to the stone path in velvet tendrils, damp from the morning mist. Resin from the altar tree burned in slow, curling threads of smoke, coiling through the air with the softness of breath. But it carried weight, the kind that settled on skin like judgment. Alera knelt in silence beneath the prayer arch, her knees pressed to the cold slate of ritual stone. She kept her back straight, shoulders steady, every inch of her posture measured and exact. But inside, the calm was a lie. The high voice stood just behind the incense basin, her robes moving only with the breeze. She had once guided Alera ceased field shaping. She had bound her wounds after the tribunal. She had not softened since. "You're unraveling," the voice said, voice like folded iron. "The human. He's not just a face in your mind." Alera did not speak. The smoke twisted between them, dense with cleansing oil and bitter bark scents. Meant to purge, not soothe. You mistake longing for resonance. You think a flicker of heat is strength? A pause. Resonance with an outsider risks collapse. You think your disgrace was exile? The voice's eyes narrowed. No, this will be erasure. Alera pressed her lips tight. She had come here to be warned, to be reminded. Not to fight, but the moment the voice spoke his name, not even fully, just the shape of it in syllables, her inner field shifted. A pulse, subtle, controlled, but unmistakable. The priestess blinked, her expression soured. She could smell it. The change, still warm for him. Alera opened her mouth. The answer came too easily, only fading memory. And still her resonance flared again, this time like the shimmer of sun on metal. A flash, not bright, but undeniable. The high voice stepped closer, robes brushing the moss. You were once a daughter of breath and silence. Now your field burns uncontrolled. Alera bowed her head lower, but it wasn't surrender. Beneath the surface, something stirred. Something that remembered his eyes steady, open, unflinching. Something that remembered wanting to be seen. The priestess turned away with a disappointed breath, as if what she smelled was already ash. But Alera remained kneeling, eyes closed. Not in prayer, not in restraint. Because if she moved, if she opened, her mouth again, she wasn't sure she could lie. Not about him. Not about the warmth that refused to fade. The room held no sound, no light save for the soft pulse of a night orb near the door. It cast the walls in low amber, shadows drawn long and still. Alera sat on the floor beside her sleeping platform, armor set aside, tunic clinging to the quiet damp of her skin. Her legs were folded beneath her, the shift's fabric brushing. Her ankles like memory. She stared at her wrist. It wasn't red, wasn't bruised, no mark lingered. But her hand hovered there, fingers spread just above the place where his glove had brushed hers during the drill. Just a touch. A moment, nothing direct, nothing binding. And yet it lingered like heat trapped under skin. She'd been touched by thousands. In battle, in training, in the chaos of survival. Grips yanked her out of fire. Hands shoved her behind cover. Blood slick. Palms caught hers before she fell, but none of them had left this silence behind. She knew she should dismiss it, dissect it, bury it, name it for what it wasn't, and let it go. Instead, her fingers lowered slowly until they met that patch of skin. The contact was light, barely there, but her breath caught. Her field swelled without command, a shimmer, soft and inward, like a thought rising without permission. It moved through her chest like a warm exhale and settled behind her ribs where no discipline could reach. Memory, replayed not with clarity, but with feeling. His voice, the awe in it. The word he wasn't supposed to say, beautiful. It had cracked something open. She didn't speak, not truly. Her mouth formed the word without sound, lips parting as if on instinct. Beautiful. She tasted it more than heard it. A shape, a heat. No one heard, not even herself. But her resonance did. It flickered faintly beneath her skin, A response older than training, deeper than law. She curled her fingers over the spot, holding it now like a memory, like a secret that didn't yet have a name. As the lights dimmed further, and her breathing slowed, Illyra did not meditate, did not fight it. She just sat still, warm, remembering the walls of the training hall echoed more than they should. Every footstep felt louder beneath the high, arched beams, the kind carved in old Velari tradition, minimalist, ceremonial. Too sacred for the kind of noise humans brought with them. And yet she heard him before she saw him. Lyra didn't need her eyes to know Daren had entered. His steps were slower than Velari, grounded more firmly into the floor, unhurried in. A way that seemed almost defiant. Where her people moved like thought efficient and quiet, he moved like breath, present, felt impossible to ignore. She stood with arms folded at the back of the hall, her frame locked into ritual stance. She told herself it was for discipline. In truth, it was a barrier. She wasn't here to engage, only to observe. That was the order. Tactical review of Terran triage methods. Emotional neutrality maintained. Field stability monitored. She repeated these conditions in her head like prayer, and still her eyes found him. He wore no armor, just the slate gray instructor uniform, sleeves rolled to the elbows. His forearms were dusted with faint scars and old burn scars he didn't hide. His hair was tied back haphazardly, as if a day hadn't earned his precision. He moved through the Velari, recruits with a kind of grace she didn't understand. Fluid, but open. Relaxed in a way that made people lean in. When he spoke, his voice carried warmth, soft edges, gentle momentum, like water rounding stone. The recruits listened. They listened. He explained pressure points and bleed containment with steady clarity. Not just what to do, but why. Illyra stayed still, eyes forward, but she heard everything. When he crouched to demonstrate a field dressing. He smiled at one of the younger cadets, a slight, shy girl with flame-red marks across her collar. The girl flinched. Daren didn't flinch in return. He simply said, "You don't have to rush. Pain makes people forget, not fail." Illyra's chest tightened. She told herself it was irritation, but her body knew better. She wasn't watching him, except she was. And when he finally glanced back just once, just a flicker of a look through the lines of bodies and breath and space, it found her. Not a long look, not a challenge, but it saw her. Her breath, caught, subtle, contained, but enough. It wasn't because he looked. It was because she wanted him to. She tore her gaze away, but it was too late. Her pulse had already shifted, her field humming just beneath the surface like a chord too faint to be called music. She steadied her breath, folded her arms tighter. She could survive being seen. She wasn't sure she could survive wanting it. The medical ward was quiet now, long after the trainees had left only the hum of low field lights and the occasional hiss of recalibrating diagnostic. Beds filled the air. The sterile scent of disinfectant lingered faintly, softened by something floral. Terran, probably. Daren had brought a diffuser from his quarters. Illyra stood at one end of the room, her posture straight as always, arms folded, watching him reset the simulation tablets. She wasn't supposed to linger. Her assignment was to observe nothing. More, but she hadn't moved. He noticed, of course. He always did. "You could teach this better than I do," he said, not looking up. "I wouldn't know where to begin," she replied. He chuckled. "That's what the charts are for. Numbers don't lie." "No," she said, stepping closer. "But they don't always tell the truth either." His hand stilled, and he turned, one brow raised. "All right," he said, casually leaning against the edge of the table. "Since you're here, tell me, Velari bleed rate under oxygen deprivation?" 0.6 liters per minute, under strain. 0.4 at rest, she answered without hesitation. "Shock index?" "Higher tolerance than humans. Shorter window to critical collapse. Pressure for abdominal gauze compression? 65 pounds? He nodded, impressed. "Guess I'm out of a job." She tilted her head slightly, but her voice softened. "You ask differently, not like a soldier." "I was raised around hospitals." His tone shifted. "Not war." He let the quiet stretch, then said, "Do Velari feel fear the way humans do?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze flickered toward him, then away. "Fear," she said carefully, "is considered a private indulgence. It has no utility. Information. We are trained to reduce it." He didn't blink, just waited. "But," she added, Voice quieter. It's there, rationed, like breath during combat. Just enough to remind you you're alive. He nodded slowly, something warm, flickering in his expression. So, you do feel it. She looked down, almost smiled, almost. And you? She asked, not quite lifting her eyes. Human scars. Are they marked or hidden? He didn't answer at first. Then, without fanfare, he rolled up his left sleeve and held out his forearm. A small white scar curved near the elbow smooth. And pale like spilled wax. Boiling kettle, he said. 6 years old. Tried to pour it myself. She frowned slightly. My mom called it my initiation into stubbornness, he added with a faint grin. She didn't laugh, but something eased in her posture. You show it without shame. He looked down at the scar, then back up. Why would I hide it? She didn't answer, but her gaze lingered not on the scar, but the way he held it out. Open. Unprotected dot, her fingers twitched slightly at her side, a barely there motion. Not habit. Not reflex dot as if, for just a second, she wanted to reach out and trace that mark. Not to compare. Not to pity dot to understand. The air between them thickened, not with silence, but with something weightless and waiting. Then someone called. His name from the corridor. He turned, called back. Just a sec. When he looked at her again, the moment had passed. Her arms were folded again, her mask worn tight. But as he left, he didn't glance back, and as she stood alone in the soft light, her fingers traitorous and warm-curled, faintly toward the place where his scar had been. The briefing hall was almost silent now, the kind of quiet that settled after voices had left it behind. The overhead lights had dimmed to low amber, just enough to cast soft shadows along the curved dome above. Beyond the translucent panels, rain ticked gently an irregular rhythm against the glass, like the world exhaling with no one left to. Here at Iliura remained by the terminal, hands loosely clasped behind her back, posture still as stone. She hadn't moved since the others had filed out. No reason to stay, not officially. Her report was already logged. Her presence no longer required dot, and yet Daren stood a few steps behind her, near the row of untouched chairs. He hadn't said anything since the last officer had left, hadn't made any motion toward the door. He was just there, unmoving, unpressing, but not leaving. She didn't look at him when she spoke. You don't have to stay. Neither do you, he replied, voice low, even. A kind of warmth, but quiet. She hesitated. Her shoulders drew a breath they didn't release. I should go, she murmured. Then why haven't you? The silence between them stretched, long, and taut, filled with the sound of rain and the faint thrum of the hall's environmental systems. He didn't move toward her, didn't demand more. That, somehow, made it easier. My sister, she said at last, barely above a whisper. She wasn't meant to be in the city that day. I got the alert, and her voice caught, just slightly. I broke protocol. I left my post. I tried to reach her. She didn't blink. She kept her gaze fixed on the far wall, where blue status lights pulsed faintly like heartbeats waiting to stop. They called it reckless, endangerment, violation of command, hierarchy. Daren didn't interrupt. He only breathed, a slow inhale, like anchoring her words inside himself, so she wouldn't have to carry them alone. She died anyway. Elira finished, softer than the rain outside. She turned to face him, then not fully, just enough that he could see her eyes in the half-light. Not glowing, not fierce, just tired. They stripped my rank, my mask. Her lips pressed together briefly. They took my right to mourn her aloud, said it was a selfish attachment, that the dead do not outweigh the living. He took one step, closer. That's not disgrace, he said quietly. That's love in a line of fire. She shook her head once, but not in denial. In disbelief, in the ache of remembering that once, someone had said something like that, without consequence. He looked at her, really looked, and something passed between them, soft and steady, then more near, he said. No one's writing reports. Her breath hitched dot, the tear came slow. She didn't fight it, didn't wipe it away. Dot, it traced a clean path through the scarred ridge of her cheek and slipped down without sound. She didn't speak again, didn't move, but in the soft dim of the hall, her mask ritual, emotional, ancestral, slid just far enough for him to see the woman underneath, and he didn't look away. The storm was crawling across the valley, slow and deliberate, like something old waking beneath the skin of the sky. Thunder rolled low, more vibration than sound pressing softly against the walls of the outpost. The lightning didn't strike clean. It flickered, twice, then again, casting fractured veins of white across the curved surface of Alera's quarters. She didn't look outside. She knelt on the floor, breath shallow, palms resting on the edge of a sealed wooden case. The grain was smooth from years of polishing, older than her commission, older than the shame that came after. The edges bore small inlays of copper leaf. Scuffed now. She hadn't opened it since her tribunal. Not since the trial that stripped her mask and made her name fall silent in every room that used to echo with respect. She told herself it no longer mattered. That ritual had no place in what remained of her. And yet here she was, hands trembling above a thing meant only for the worthy. With a breath she didn't mean to take, she cracked the seal. The hinges made no sound. Inside, fabric folded with reverence. A ceremonial brush, and at the center, a small glass jar nestled into velvet. Its shape was familiar oval, plain, etched with a single Velari rune that meant honor through pain. Her fingers hovered. She shouldn't. Only those recognized by the circle had the right to use it. The salve was applied after warrior rites moments, when scars were seen not as failure, but transformation. Her scars had not come from ceremony. They had come from betrayal, from desperation, from the kind of love the circle deemed reckless. But still, her hand closed around the jar. Her thumb slipped over the seal. The lid turned open with a soft pop, and then the scentator. Burned petals, crushed sanctum leaves, sacred oil aged in stone. She gasped. It was a scent from another life, one she had once believed she would die living. It filled her lungs without. Permission made her eyes sting, not from grief, from memory. The salve shimmered faintly in the jar, catching the dim light like fluid starlight. Her fingers dipped into it. She didn't know why. And then slowly, reverently, she brought her hand to her face. The first touch of her fingers to her scar was so light it barely counted. But it was felt. The salve warmed as it met her skin, and something beneath that skin trembled. Her resonance stirred, not flaring, not spiking, just moving, like the soft lift before a kiss. She traced the path along her cheekbone, the jagged line from temple to jaw. Not to erase it, not to anoint it, not to acknowledge it. This is not permission, she told herself. It's remembrance. But her field fluttered warm. Just once. It pulsed like recognition, like a name whispered in the dark. Outside, the lightning flashed. Again, sharper this time, etching pale light across her face and its fractured lines. Her eyes stayed closed. Her hand fell slowly to her lap. The warmth did not fade. It lingered, soft and full, like the echo of a touch that wasn't hers. And maybe it didn't belong to her anymore. Maybe it never did. But something inside her knew this was more than memory. It was the beginning of belonging again. The rain had been falling for hours. Not soft, not subtle. Each drop thudded against the overhead dome like distant drumming, like a memory she couldn't quite place but recognized anyway. Alera lay on her side, spine straight, arms folded beneath the blanket pulled only halfway over her body. The other half was open to the cool air by design. She could have closed the vent, could have sealed the chamber. But tonight, she wanted to feel the cold crawl over her skin. Her fingers still smelled faintly of the salve. Burned petals and sacred oils clung to her like a truth that wouldn't be scrubbed away. She'd washed her hands 3 times, but the scent remained, stubborn as breath. Her skin tingled. It wasn't just the salve. It was the echo of it, the choice, the fact that she'd touched her own scars and hadn't felt shame, that something in her had welcomed it, had warmed under it. She exhaled slowly. Her breath fogged the glass nearest her bed. Each cloud faded fast. The chamber was too well ventilated to allow ghosts to linger. And still, she could feel him. Not in body, not in proximity. Just in resonance. The memory of his voice curled beneath her. Thoughts like silk. That's what I'd call beautiful. He hadn't said it like a question. He hadn't flinched when he saw her. He hadn't looked away, even when she did. He had meant it. She closed her eyes. The warmth of that moment settled beneath her ribs, not like fire, but like a shared breath on a winter walk. Steady, quiet, alive. She should have reported the breach, logged the accidental contact, filed the proximity notice. She should have flagged the training roster and requested reassignment. She had done none of it. And now, A silence of omission curled up beside her like something feral and waiting. The storm outside cracked thunder, low and rolling. A vibration through the floor. The kind of sound the old texts warned about. The kind that accompanied omens or battlefield shifts. But she didn't feel dread. She felt... Still, her thoughts hummed. Yes, but not with guilt. Not with panic. With him. The shape of his voice. The rhythm of his questions. The human way he shrugged when she asked about his scars. If pain could be worn without apology, she had spent a lifetime hiding hers. In silence, in ritual, in exile. But Daren had seen them, named them beautiful, and meant it. She inhaled through her nose. Slow, deliberate. Not rationed. This is what it means to breathe freely. She thought. Her hand drifted upward, resting lightly on the side of her neck where his field had once brushed hers. Just barely, in that near contact during the drill. It hadn't been registered. It hadn't even been intentional. But her resonance had felt it. Recognized it. It still pulsed when she thought of him. Another crash of thunder shook the dome, and the rain changed pitch sharper, louder, like fingers tapping harder against a confession. The world, perhaps, warning her of a line soon to be. Cross. She did not close the window. Let the warning come. Let the storm speak. She pulled the blanket up only slightly and shifted onto her back. The scent of the salve still lingering on her wrist. The ghost of his voice still flickering through her, like candlelight behind her eyelids. And she whispered, just once, not to be heard, not even to be understood. Daren. Not as question. As warmth. As fact. As the thing she no longer wanted to forget. She listened to the storm and did not regret. The garden was carved from memory and silence. Polished obsidian markers lined the stone path, their surfaces etched with glowing glyphs that shimmered faintly in the lantern light. Each marked the life of a Velari, fallen in honor, names never spoken aloud again. Stories locked within until the end of all reckonings. No laughter passed this way. No voices rose above whispers. It was a place for reverence, for solitude. And yet tonight, there were two shadows where there should only have been one. Alara walked beside him, each step measured, each breath tightly folded behind her ribs. Her robes moved soundlessly, ceremonial threads brushed with ash-gray hues that caught the light only when she turned a certain way. Daren stayed close, but not too close. He knew this place wasn't for him. His boots crunched softly against the gravel, loud in the hush. He didn't speak. Not until she did. That one, she said, her voice barely more than a thread, was my second mentor. She taught me the velocity of retreat. It sounds like a contradiction, but it saved 36 lives. He nodded once, solemn. He could feel her holding herself upright, spine a perfect line, like the discipline she was always expected to wear. The wind shifted, faint and cool. The scent of glass leaf trees mingled with something floral and dry like petals, preserved too long in ancient pages. It pulled at her braid, loosened a strand. Pale silver slipped from the tight weave and kissed her cheek. Before he could think, Daren lifted a hand. Fingers brushed her temple. Gentle, just enough pressure to catch the strand and tuck it behind her ear. It was nothing, a reflex, a kindness. But the moment he touched her, her breath snagged. Her shoulders tensed, then didn't. She didn't flinch. Her skin, smooth and warm under his glove, didn't recoil. Her gaze flicked toward him wider now. Uncertain but not afraid. He lowered his hand slowly, suddenly aware of the ritual weight of what he'd done. To him, it had been human habit. To her, it was a vow. She looked forward again, lips parting, but said nothing. He did the same. Silence that followed was heavier, but not hollow. It was full of the thing between them that neither dared name. The garden hummed with it. Somewhere, behind the thick veil of trees, a spectral flicker shimmered like the blink of an unseen eye and faded. They'll say I shouldn't have brought you here, Alara said softly. I know, he murmured. They'll say it means something. His voice was steady. Doesn't it? A pause stretched, delicate and breakable. It shouldn't, she said at last. But she didn't walk away. She turned instead and placed her hand on one of the markers, her fingers tracing the line of a glyph glowing faint blue. Her resonance field pulsed light and steady. Steady, even as her heart felt anything. But Daren stood beside her. Didn't touch her again. But the warmth of that single moment clung to the air between them like incense that refused to fade. She should have said something more. Should have redrawn the boundary, but she couldn't make herself forget the feel of his. Fingers against her skin. Couldn't stop the echo of that single touch as it replayed behind her ribs. Over and over. So they stood together in the garden of the silent, hearts speaking where their mouths could not. And for once, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like beginning. By morning, the air was wrong. It crackled faintly, like a storm caught behind walls. As Elara stepped into the upper corridor, the silence pressed against her shoulders, not serene, not sacred, watchful. Tense. The first to pass her was a guard in obsidian robes. He met her gaze for half a heartbeat, then quickly looked down, his shoulders too straight, his breath too short. She kept walking. A junior priestess rounded the corner, young, devoted. Until last week, she'd smiled at Elara in passing, offered ritual palms and greeting. Now her eyes skittered sideways, face pale as split bark, and she turned down another hall without a word. Lara did not stop, not even when she reached the center alcove and saw it, the summons, inked in black on a shard of lacquered parchment. Affixed to the tribunal column with formal seal. Name, Elara Vash. Charge, emotional. Resonance outside mandated code. Status, tribunal observation required. No name for the other party. But they didn't need one. Everyone knew, someone had seen. The garden, the touch, maybe even the field pulse that followed. Someone had spoken. The law didn't rage, it rustled. It stirred like dry leaves over flame. She reported at sunset. Hearing circle was carved from stone older than memory, smooth as bone and twice as cold. Lanterns flickered behind sand crystal veils, casting pale warmth that never reached the floor. Elara stood at the center, armor removed, robe ceremonial. Her hands rested calmly over her midsection. A dozen elders watched her from above. In silence. The air smelled of resin and dusted ash. When the voice finally spoke, it was with no tone at all. Commander Vash, you stand before us under observation for violation of Field Code 9. Do you understand? I do. Were ritual breath or binding words exchanged? Her jaw locked. Her spine ached to shift, but she did not allow it. No, she said. Clear. Controlled. There is no bond. Silence. And then only for an instant her resonance. Field fluttered. So slight. So quick. Like wind across still water. The younger elders missed it. 3 did not. They exchanged glances. No gesture, no words. But something shifted. A ripple beneath stillness. She kept her face neutral, her eyes fixed on nothing. They didn't press her further. After 17 seconds of formal silence, the voice spoke again. Conclusion, no punitive. Breach, but circumstantial indicators require containment. Effective immediately, you will refrain from external duties and remain under field observation until further notice. You may not initiate unfiltered interaction with non-Velari personnel. She bowed low, understood. They dismissed her. She stepped into the corridor like a shadow. The hall felt narrower now. The light dimmer. It wasn't punishment. Not yet, but it wasn't freedom either. She returned to her quarters in silence, didn't remove her boots, didn't sit. Her eyes lingered on the small meditation alcove, the one where she'd once whispered his name. The echo of it still pulsed. In the walls, they had asked if she bonded with him, and she had said no, but her resonance had answered otherwise. Just once. A flicker. And flickers, among Velari, were never accidents. The summons came in the early morning, delivered with a smile that didn't reach the eyes. They said it was a reassignment, a standard redeployment, diplomatic necessity. But Daren could read between lines as easily as he could scars. This wasn't about need. It was extraction, polite, permanent, wrapped in thank yous and silence. He asked once, low and even, did she request this? The envoy didn't blink. This comes from above. That told him enough. She wasn't at the shuttle. She wasn't in the quarters. He checked anyway, and then quiet, instinctual, he found himself walking the corridor toward the old practice hall. No orders guided him. Just something quieter than thought, louder than fear. The doors creaked open. There she was, alone in the center of the room, framed by dim overhead lights. No armor, no mask, just the discipline of her posture, tall, silent, immovable. Like a monument, no one was allowed to mourn. She didn't turn when he stepped inside, but her breath caught just slightly. That was enough. I guess this is goodbye, he said softly. She didn't speak at first. And when she did, her voice was quieter than the wind against glass. "This is safer." The words should have angered him. They didn't. He understood too. Much, maybe. The weight of things unsaid. The walls her world wrapped around her. The rituals that cut like law. "Safer," he echoed, as if tasting it. Yeah, that's not the same as right. Her fingers curled tighter at her sides. He stepped closer. Not enough to break the space between them, but close enough that she would feel the warmth of him. Close enough for the air to charge. She still didn't move, but her voice broke the silence again. "You'll forget me." His laugh was small, not mocking, soft, aching. "That's the one thing I can't do." He reached out, slow, like a prayer offered without certainty. His fingers brushed hers, skin to skin. It was nothing. And everything. A second, a spark. A breath shared without breath. She didn't pull away, but she didn't hold on either. Instead, her hand stayed loose like a farewell that couldn't bear to close. And then she turned. Head bowed, hair falling like a veil. He saw her shoulders shift, just barely. A tremor she didn't allow to reach her voice. "Go," she said. He didn't argue, didn't speak. Just stepped back, slowly, as if the air itself might shatter if disturbed too fast. When he reached the door, he looked back. She hadn't moved, but her field, the one he had learned to sense without seeing, shimmered faintly behind her, like heat. Over stone, flickering, unstable. He left anyway, and she stayed standing, fingers curled over the ghost of his touch, heart unraveled in silence, too afraid to say goodbye the way her body already had. The chamber was dark, save for the muted glow of the meditation basin. Blue light shimmered softly on the stone walls, meant to soothe, to silence thought. Alara knelt before it, spine straight, hands resting on her thighs, but her breath refused to settle. Inhale, hold, exhale, stillness. But the stillness was a lie. Her resonance, the trained field of balance she'd owned since childhood, trembled, an echo out of sync. It pulsed too high, then dropped too low. The rhythm she'd once mastered as easily as walking now slipped like water through shaking hands. She exhaled again, slower this time. Tried to empty the noise inside, but it wasn't just noise. It was his voice, his eyes, his hand brushing hers in that last moment, not forced, just there, honest. Her fingers clenched, the tremor surged deep, low, crawling through her skin, like static rising from the ground before lightning. The lights overhead dimmed, then flared too bright. Ceramics cracked. A carved incense dish split in two with a sound like bone. She gasped, one hand flying up not to shield, but to stop it. Too late. The shards lifted in the air for a breath, caught in her field, then fell like glass rain around her. A sharp knock. Voices just outside. One of the temple attendants had felt it, her breach of balance. The ripple of resonance gone wild. She didn't speak, didn't move. Just knelt there, chest heaving, sweat cold on her brow. Later, they came with calm, firm voices. Placed her under observation. Words like containment and review floated around her, like smoke she didn't bother to breathe. She accepted it all in silence, as if it had already been decided, as if it were deserved. But when they left, and the chamber fell still again, she leaned forward. Her hands gripped the stone edge of the basin until their knuckles whitened. The reflection in the water swam too bright, too soft, too wrong. She lowered her head until her lips almost touched the surface. The silence stretched taut like thread. Then she whispered, "Daren." Just his name, not a plea, not a memory. A tether. The word dropped into the basin like a stone. Her resonance answered, not in pain, but need. And that was the worst part. Not the punishment, not the breach, but how much she didn't want to forget. The way he made her feel real. The mirror offered no comfort. It never had. Obsidian was chosen for its perfection, its silence, its refusal to flatter. It showed only what was there. Alara knelt before it, legs folded beneath her, hair loose and trailing like ink down her back. Her face was bare, not unadorned, but exposed. She studied the jagged lines that crossed her cheek and temple scars, left not by enemy blades, but tribunal lasers. Marks of disobedience. Wounds carved into memory. For years, she had trained herself to look without reaction, to acknowledge, but not feel, to accept the disfigurement as owed. But tonight, the silence around her didn't press. It listened. His voice echoed not loud, Not recent, but real. They're beautiful. 3 words. Not wrapped in ritual, not offered for comfort, just truth. Quiet and steady. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't breathe. By count, no trained cadence. No Velari regulation of intake and release. She breathed like he did. In time, with the memory of his chest rising beside hers, slow, deep, human. Her field stirred, no longer frayed, no longer panicked. It thrummed. Low and warm beneath her skin, like heat returning after too long in the cold. Not control. Not imbalance. Clarity. She opened her eyes again, and the woman in the mirror was not smaller for the scars. She wasn't diminished. She wasn't even angry. She was present, remembering the shape of awe in someone else's eyes. Her fingers moved. Before she could stop them, they lifted, hovered just beside the ridged line across her cheekbone. Not to hide it, not to press it away, just to touch, just to feel. Her skin was warm beneath her fingertips, and the echo of his voice remained. Everything. She had learned, the teachings drilled into her from the first resonance flare in her youth, spoke of suppression, of stillness, of never giving another being power over your center. And yet, what he gave her wasn't power. It wasn't intrusion, it was sight. The unbearable tenderness of being seen. She pressed her palm to her cheek, not as defense, as memory, as permission. The tears came softly, not in grief, in knowing. She whispered, too low for the walls to hear. You saw me. And in that moment, she saw herself, not as a failed warrior, not as a name on a tribunal list, but as a woman with heat in her field, and the trace of his rhythm in her breath. She didn't believe what they taught anymore, but she did believe in that voice, and that wouldn't fade. The low thrum of the shuttle platform pulsed beneath Daren's boots like a heart trying not to beat too loud. He stood at the edge of the ramp, duffel slung over his shoulder, posture taut and unmoving. Around him, departure lights blinked in soft amber, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Protocol officers murmured. A child cried somewhere behind the terminal gloss. The world, for now, kept moving, but then something shifted. Not a sound, a silence. Not absence, but presence. Like a room holding its breath. Like the pause before lightning finds the earth. He turned. She was there. A single quotes Lera. Not in armor. Not masked. Or draped in the silence of command. Just Elera. Hair unbound, shoulders squared. The bones of her face bare to the light. Her steps struck the floor with ritual stillness measured, not hesitant. And in her hand, broken porcelain. Shattered. Ivory and gold. Her ceremonial mask, the one she had once worn like a second skin, the one that had hidden her face and the pain written on it from her own people. She moved with impossible calm, but Daren could see it, the tremor beneath her stillness. Her fingers gripped the shards too tightly. Her breath stayed shallow, like a flame barely tethered to its wick. He didn't move toward her, didn't dare. She crossed the chamber floor past whispering aides and stone-faced guards, until she stood before the high voice. The matron priestess, draped in cobalt veils, said nothing. The council behind her said nothing, but the silence vibrated now. Like tension drawn across a wire. Elera raised her hand and dropped the pieces at the priestess's feet. They hit the ground with the sound of finality. Not the crash of fury, but the deliberate strike of something released. The mask didn't scatter, it surrendered. I reject your judgment, she said. Her voice did not rise, but it carried across every ear, through every wall, and the silence it taught me. Someone inhaled sharply behind Daren. Another took a step back, as if the words themselves were fire. The priestess did not bend to pick up the pieces. Her eyes shimmered through her veil, not with anger, with recognition, or perhaps warning, but Elera did not look away. Daren's fingers curled tighter around his bag. His throat felt too small for the air inside it. She didn't glance at him. Not yet, but he felt her field, the pulse of it. Not restrained, not suppressed, radiant, fierce, and slowly she turned. Their eyes met. And everything else, the noise, the rules, the judgment peeled away. His lips parted, but no words came. They weren't needed. She was here, not to follow him, but to stand beside what had always been real. She crossed the final space between them. No rush, just knowing. Her palm brushed the back of his hand, and even that was enough to send a shiver up his spine. Not electricity. Recognition. Neither of them spoke. But in that quiet, her resonance flickered. Not wildly. Not in pain. Warm. And when he reached out to her to take her hand, not just brush it, she didn't flinch. She held on. The council chamber was still, the air heavy with sacred incense and the weight of unsaid truths. Lanterns flickered along the high walls, casting long ceremonial shadows across the polished floor. Elara stepped forward, her bare feet silent but sure against the stone. Her breath slowed not in ritual rhythm, but in something deeper. Her own. She didn't look at the others yet. Not the watching elders. Not the young initiates seated in neat rows like cold statues of obedience. Her gaze rested instead on the obsidian floor before her, then rose. Her voice did not shake. He saw beauty where you taught me to hide. The words dropped into the silence like warm blood on snow. The chamber seemed to tense, like a body bracing for pain. He called my scar stories. Still no interruption. No breath dared rise and challenge. And I, her voice caught, not with hesitation, but with memory. With the feel of fingers ghosting against her cheek. I wanted to believe him. A murmur stirred barely audible but. The high voice rose slowly from her carved dais, robes whispering like wind against leaves. The matron's expression remained carved in ritual, ageless and still. Her voice, however, was winter. You admit emotional compromise with a Terran? The question struck like a whip, but Elara didn't flinch. She raised her chin, the marks across her skin visible, unhidden, kissed by the pale gold light. I admit, she said, that I am no longer afraid to be seen. Her heart didn't thunder, it thrummed. Low, steady. Her field didn't flare, it pulsed, warm, resolute. The silence held. And then something in it shifted. Among the younger council members, eyes flicked downward. Not in shame. Not even in fear. But reverence, understanding. A softness where once there had only been rigidity. She could feel it, the way some of them mirrored her field. Subtle and unsure. Not permission, not yet. But possibility. The high voice's gaze lingered on Elara for a long, long moment. Then she turned not in dismissal, but in silence. A silence with no command behind it. Elara remained standing. Outside, rain began to fall. Not a storm, just rain. Soft, cleansing. It tapped against the high dome like a lullaby being remembered. And inside her chest, the memory of Daren's voice settled like a hearth fire in winter. You don't have to hide that from me. She hadn't. Not anymore. The past had taught. Her silence. Ritual had demanded stillness. But Daren had seen her beneath the armor, beneath the code, and had not looked away. And now, neither did she. Elara turned from the circle, her steps unhurried. Her fingers brushed the center of her chest, just once, where her resonance field lived alive. And whole. It didn't burn. It glowed. The wind on the departure platform had tasted of metal and departure, sterile and final, until the come in Daren's hand lit up with a name he hadn't heard spoken aloud by command in days. Commander Elara, Vash, Council Defiance, unarmed public. His bag hit the floor before he processed that he dropped it. His legs moved faster than thought. One of the security staff stepped forward, hand raised to stop him. Daren didn't look at him, just ran. Heart pounding, lungs stinging. The corridors blurred past like streaks of warlight. He barely heard the shouts behind him. Didn't feel the weight of his boots or the burn in his muscles. She was standing alone. That was the first thing that hit him when he burst into the council. Amphitheater, how small she looked in the center of the great ring. No armor, no weapon. Just her shift and her scars, and something unshakably still about the way she stood. His chest heaved with breath, but he stayed just inside the archway, unseen. The elders stood in their tiered seats, unmoving. A frozen wave of judgment, poised mid-crash, and Elara didn't bow, didn't kneel. Her chin was lifted. Her resonance was bare. He could feel it, even from here, a hum in the air, low and true. Then, something moved. A Velari trainee young, not even out of full right, stepped forward from the side chamber, silent, steady. She approached Elara and slowly, deliberately, knelt. A breath caught in the room, then another. A second recruit followed, then two more. No ceremony, no command. They just joined her. Not to protect, not to protest. To see. And every eye, not just the kneeling ones, but those behind the elder masks, behind the protocol, and fear shifted toward the same place. Toward Alera's scars. Not with disgust, not with recognition. Daren's throat tightened. He stepped forward, unable to help it now. The room didn't stop him. It didn't need to. He wasn't the one making the moment sacred. She was. He reached the center as the last trainee bowed her head. Alera turned slightly, not startled, but aware. She didn't smile. Didn't speak. Her eyes met his. And in them was a kind of quiet he'd never seen before. Not the stillness of repression, the stillness of choice. I thought you'd be gone by now, she said softly. I couldn't leave, he breathed. Not if they didn't take me. Her voice held no triumph, just truth. They saw me. He stepped closer. So did I? She nodded, almost imperceptibly. I know. His hand hovered near hers, not touching, just the heat. Between them, alive and trembling. Around them, the air felt charged, not loud, but reverent. She didn't reach for him, but she didn't step away either. Instead, her fingers open, palm up, quiet, offered, and he filled it with his own. No. One gasp. No one spoke, but somewhere in the walls of that ancient chamber, something unseen shifted, something old cracked, and something new began. The silence between them was absolute. Not the awkward kind. This was deeper, intentional, alive, as if the very air, heavy with incense and ozone, waited to see who would move first. Daren stood beneath the council ring, alone but unmoved. No weapons, no orders left to follow. Only the truth of why he had stayed. Alera stood across the polished stone floor, unflinching in her stillness. Her bare feet felt the vibration of every breath in the room. She did not know if this moment would be her end or her release, but it no longer mattered. He raised his hand, slow, no demand in it, just a trembling offer. Fingers open, waiting. Her body moved before her fear could catch up. One step, two, each a rejection of silence, of doctrine, of everything that had once kept her hands behind her back and her heart behind walls. The chamber full of Velari elders, trainees, even ghost-still priestesses, watched without sound. When her palm reached his, the contact was barely a touch, a whisper of skin, but the world noticed. A flare of light erupted between them, not from the chamber, but from within. Gold bled into pale blue, spiraling outward in luminous threads that crackled like distant lightning made soft. The air shivered. The stone pulsed, and every resonance field in the room trembled in response. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't romantic. It was real. Bond. VLAR. I did not bond without rite, without circle, without sequence. But this bond ignored all of that. It pulsed through their joined hands, like a heartbeat they now shared. Some in the chamber flinched, recoiled as if burned. Others didn't move at all. One young recruit closed her eyes and smiled, like someone watching the first sunrise after years in the dark. The high priestess stepped forward, lips moving, ready to speak in judgment, but her words vanished beneath the weight of the light. It shimmered, swelled, surged out. Alera turned toward Daren, her voice steady, soft enough to be private, yet loud enough to never be forgotten. I would rather be scarred and seen than perfect and alone. The echo of it didn't fade. It settled, like dust after a storm. Like promise, Daren's thumb brushed the edge of her palm. She didn't look away. Neither did anyone else. And though no decree was spoken, the moment made one thing clear, that no one would stop her now. Not because they agreed, but because they felt it, because that light, that bond was truer than any law. The chamber did not speak. It breathed, faint and disjointed, like a temple waking after centuries underground. The light had faded. The resonance field had quieted. But something hung in the air, an afterimage etched, deeper than protocol. No declarations followed. No charges read aloud. The oldest counselor blinked once and looked away. The second tapped her ceremonial cane, but made no motion to rise. The third, youngest by decades, stared openly at Alera in judgment. In awe. No punishment came. Not because the council agreed, but because they feared what would happen if they pressed too hard. Not from her, from the eyes watching across the stars. The Terran delegation sat quietly in the upper gallery, their expressions unreadable. Daren didn't look up at them. His attention never left Alera. Not when the elders stood. Not when the hearing dissolved into whispers and split paths. They didn't imprison her. They didn't reinstate her. They moved her quietly, almost apologetically, to a far-flung cultural studies outpost. A position without prestige. Without chains. She didn't speak during the reassignment. Not even when they labeled her transfer a reflection period. A week later, her ship sat humming on the diplomatic launch pad. Low fog rolled across the bay, painting everything in silver softness. She wore no armor now, just a traveler's cloak and silence. Daren appeared beside her. He didn't knock on her door or ask permission to board. He simply signed the flight, manifest as her liaison support dot, when the officer at the desk began to explain that the Terran envoy position hadn't been finalized. Daren held up a hand. "I volunteered," he said. Didn't wait for the sentence to finish. The officer glanced at Ilera. She gave a nod so small, it might have been breath dot approved dot as they walked toward the shuttle. 2 Velari stood at the edge of the ramp. Not guards, not elders dot young. Clean-faced, still flush with ritual ink and sharp with first-rate posture. They removed their helmets. Both of them. A gesture that meant only one thing in Velari tradition. "We see you." "We do not avert our gaze." Ilera paused at the foot of the ramp. Her hand brushed Daren's as if by accident, but neither of them drew away. There was no flare this time. Number. Electric pulse. No shock of resonance throwing light into the sky. Only warmth. Settled. Certain. He looked down at their joined fingers, then up at her. Still rewriting the script? Her voice was quiet. The script never knew how to end. He smiled. It wasn't triumphant. It was tired. Grateful. Real. Behind them, the world held its breath. Ahead of them, the ship door whispered open with a hush that felt like possibility. No one had declared their bond legal. No one had outlawed it either. Some laws don't. Collapse. They blink. And in that blink, new stories are written. The shuttle. Door closed with a hush behind him. No trumpets. No banners. Just wind threading through the moss-lined trees and the muted chirr of dusk insects waking on Velan Prime. Daren's boots touched ground. The air here carried a faint mineral sweetness, as if the rivers had memory. He let it fill his lungs. Calming the thrum beneath his ribs, she was already there. Ilera stood near the outpost gate, framed by stone and stillness. Her arms were crossed, not defensive anchored. A light breeze caught the edge of her tunic, lifting it just enough to hint at motion, but her stance remained carved from something older than command. Their eyes met. She didn't smile, neither did he, but his breath steadied. Her shoulders eased a fraction. The last time they stood this close, light had burst from their joined hands. No sparks now. No ritual flares. Just the soft hush of two people who had crossed too many thresholds to need fanfare. He walked toward her, not quickly, not slowly, just enough that the gravel underfoot didn't echo. "You came," she said, voice low, unarmored. He nodded once. Wasn't a decision. She looked at the bags in his hands, modest, worn, practical. "They assigned you quarters." "I asked for shared housing." A blink, not protest, not approval. Just processing. And then she turned, silent. The gates opened without effort, reading her clearance without her needing to raise a hand. He fell in step beside her. The path curved through bioluminescent grass that pulsed faintly underfoot. Far ahead, a small structure sat nestled against a hill, lights dim and windows wide. No guards, no schedules. Just space. Neither of them spoke, but the silence was no longer armor. It was something breathed, shared, settled into like an old song neither remembered learning. He glanced sideways as they walked, not to study her, just to confirm what his senses already told him. She was here, not hidden, not punished, not reduced. Just dash here. She reached the doorway first and paused, hand brushing the frame, then looked at him. "There's tea. I don't know if it's Terran compatible." He almost smiled. "If it burns my tongue off, I'll blame diplomacy." A breath escaped her, half exhale, half almost laugh. He followed her inside. And in that simple motion, no vow, no flare, no witness, the distance between exile and belonging vanished. Not silence anymore. Peace. The soil clung to his fingers, dark and clumpy, stubborn from the heat of the day. It wasn't the kind of ground that welcomed new things. Not easily. Not at first. Daren pressed his palm against it anyway, feeling the slight hum that meant the resonance field was beginning to recognize them. Ilera knelt beside him, her posture deliberate, movements fluid in a way that only came from old discipline, unlearning itself slowly. They didn't speak much tonight. The breeze tugged at her, hair looser now than it ever was in uniform, and lifted the scent of dry earth and distant moss. Between them sat a small clay bowl, its rim etched with simple Terran marks. Memory, root, return. She ran a fingertip along the edge, tracing one character she had asked him to repeat until she said it better than he did. He nudged a seed into a narrow furrow between their hands. Half Velari, half Terran. A hybrid flora not yet recognized by either government as official, too strange, too responsive. The petals, when they bloomed, would shimmer faintly when touched. Alara said. They could feel kindness. Daren didn't argue. Her hand moved near his, brushing the dirt away from his wrist, slow and casual. Too slow, too casual. Her touch lingered longer than needed. He didn't move. His breath caught, soft and full, like the earth had stolen it and held it gently beneath the surface. She looked at the spot she'd cleaned, not him. You're always the one they lean toward. He tilted his head. The sprouts? She nodded once. They know your voice. He smiled, thumb pressing. A line into the soil to mark where the next one would go. That just means they're smart. There was a silence between them. Not empty, just waiting. The sky above turned violet at the edges, stars beginning to press through, like the land had torn slightly to show another world. Lanterns hung from the edge of the old terrace wall, their light flickering gold across. The grove's rough beginnings, Alara, didn't shift away. Instead, she sat back on her heels, hands resting loosely in her lap, and glanced sideways at him. This is what I never thought I'd have. Her voice wasn't soft. It was certain. Daren didn't answer. Not with words. He just kept planting and made sure the line between them held no space for anything but growing things. The sky beyond the glass was an ocean of violet, deepening with the hush of night. No curtains shielded them. Nothing veiled the stars or the shadows that had once lived between them. They sat cross-legged on woven mats, backs nearly touching, the bare floor warm beneath them from the last kiss of the sun. No ritual flame burned. No chant framed their silence. Only breath. Alara exhaled, slow and deep, her lungs emptying in a practiced tide. Behind her, Daren drew in that breath like it belonged to him. In the old teachings, ritual breath was sacred, solitary, a discipline, of control. But she had broken that law the first time she allowed him near, when the night quieted her walls. And now it wasn't ritual anymore. It was rhythm. She felt him shift, barely. A small correction of posture, and her spine responded without thought, aligning like water following its shore. Their pulsers sharper, his steadier met in the space between their shoulders. Her inner field reached, not flaring like it used to, not flickering or retreating. Just there, present, anchored. She did not mean to open her eyes, but she did. He was still in it, breathing slow, lashes low, his hands open in his lap, as if the world could place anything into them, and he would carry it without complaint. There was no armor in his face, no mask, just the lines of a man unshaped by pretense. Her chest ached. Not from longing. From recognition. She turned slightly, just enough to see the edge of his profile illuminated by the valley moonlight, silver tracing his jaw like a memory drawn in ink. For once, she didn't wonder what he thought of her scars. Wondered only if he could feel how her breath had changed. She sat that way, eyes open, while he remained still until the moment passed, and the hum between them settled into something quiet and full. Later, when they rose in unspoken agreement, her fingers moved to the tie at the back of her braid. She let it go. The strands fell down her back, soft and long, freed for the first time outside solitude. Daren's gaze caught it as the loose waves shifted in the breeze from the open vent. His lips parted, just slightly, as though reverence had taken language from him. You don't have to hide anymore, he said. Not command, not comfort, just truth. She turned to him, the corners of her mouth not quite a smile, but softer than she had ever let them be. I'm not, she answered, and it was true. The garden shimmered in the stillness of noon, wrapped in birdsong and the faint perfume of dusk leaf blossoms curling open despite the heat. Light filtered through the canopy, above scattered gold and green, washing the soil in patches of soft breath. Dust motes floated between the vines like the echo of time slowing down, as if the air itself had chosen to watch. Alara crouched, low in the shadow of a thick-bloomed vine, her fingers moving with practiced care. She worked in silence, letting the ritual of pruning calm the uneven rhythm of her thoughts. The plant responded to touch leaning toward intention, and she gave it only gentleness. Footsteps, crunched lightly across the stone path. She didn't look up at first. Children often wandered through this part of the colony. They liked to ask about the magic flowers or the glowing fruit that sang when picked. But this time, no question came, only stillness, and then small fingers on. Her cheek. Alera froze, breath caught halfway. The touch wasn't hesitant. It wasn't rough. It was Reverent. The child, a Terran girl with a mop of braids and a smudge of earth across one brow, stood barely to Alera's shoulder. She looked up, face tilted in quiet wonder, and traced the arc of the scar that curved from temple to jaw. Her fingertip was warm. "You have stars on your face," the girl said, not like a compliment, like a truth. Alera's throat tightened. She couldn't remember the last time someone touched her there without flinching, without apology or fear. Not even Daren had not yet. The scar had been ceremony once, then punishment, then shame. Now, this child looked at it as if it were sky. She lowered herself to one knee, coming level with the child. Her hands remained still at her sides. Her voice, when it came, was low and careful. "They are," she said. "There. What's left after the fire." The girl beamed like she'd guessed right on something that mattered. Then she turned and skipped away down the path, already distracted by a vine glowing orange under the afternoon sun. No parting word, no lingering glance, just a truth left behind like a seed. That night, Elira stood alone at the stone gate leading into the garden, a chisel in hand. The stone still held the runes of seasons past, ritual glyphs, names of blooms, fragments of old songs from both worlds. But this one was new. She carved carefully. No script, just shape. A Velari rune few had reason to use anymore. The meaning didn't translate cleanly into Terran speech. Becoming when she finished. She rested her hand against the groove, letting her field settle into the shape. Behind her, she heard the soft crunch of Daren's boots on gravel. He didn't speak. He didn't ask. He just came close enough for her to feel his presence. Like warmth in the cool air. His fingers found hers without needing permission. Still scarred, still warm, still hers. She didn't pull away. The garden had grown wild with time, but not in defiance, only freedom. Vines curled across old stone paths that no longer demanded order, only presence. The blooms were strange things, streaked with colors no seed should have borne, whispering pollen notes of Terran jasmine, Velari pulse lilac, and something else entirely. Something new. Alera moved slowly, her fingertips trailing along the edges of a tall blossom, still wet with dew. It responded to her touch with a soft hum, petals shifting ever so slightly toward her skin. Her breath caught, not with surprise, but with memory. Long ago, she would have worn gloves or armor. Now her hands were bare. The wind moved through. Her braid and her silvered scars caught the light like worn metal left out in sun, no longer fresh, no longer hidden. She did not flinch beneath them. They had not disappeared, but they no longer defined her edge. Only her depth. She paused near a curved wall of stone, etched with faded runes. Her gaze lingered on one, traced there by a younger version of herself. A rune for becoming. Beneath it, vines bloomed purple and gold. Then laughter. It rolled through the air, carried on little feet across the courtyard. She turned, just slightly, as a child burst into view, hair wild, eyes gleaming with both stars and dirt. "Mama!" The child shouted, grinning, arms flung wide. Alera's heart did not brace. It opened. She smiled. And this time, she didn't look away. The cup touched her palm like a promise she hadn't dared ask for. Not a word had passed between them. Not yet, but the flower brew was warm, faintly sweet, stirred 3 times. She didn't need to look to know it was him. She felt him first. That subtle ripple of awareness, like a resonance echo against her spine. Not loud, not demanding, just there. Just his. The old singing tree swayed above them, its wide branches casting dappled patterns across the mossy ground. When the breeze passed through its leaves, it hummed not a song, exactly, but something deeper. A tone that brushed against her chest and settled in her bones. She'd planted it in solitude, but it no longer grew alone. She sipped slowly. The taste hadn't changed, still the hint of root flower, still that quiet warmth that reached behind the tongue and wrapped itself around memory. He sat beside her, close enough to feel. Not touching, just steady. Just real. She didn't speak. Neither did he, but the silence between them pulsed, not empty, not expectant. It was space they had made, over time, with pain and quiet and choosing. A silence not meant to be filled, only kept. The light slanted low over the garden, casting gold across the stone paths where the moss grew thick between each deliberate line. Illyra sat beside the old root wall, hands resting on her knees, gaze calm but not soft. She felt the moment before she saw it, the shift in the hum of the air, the slight catch in resonance. Two elder Velari approached, their pace unhurried. One wore the violet sigil of the ancient caste, the other bore the marked sash of the tribunal. Old roles, older scars. She didn't stand. She wouldn't. They halted a few paces from her, the silence stretching not tense, but deep. A kind of silence that had once condemned her, once carried the weight of judgments sealed in breathless protocol. And then, slowly, with no ceremony but no hesitation, they removed their helmets. It was not surrender. It was not approval. But it was recognition. Their faces were bare. Their fields held steady, not closed in rejection, but in something quieter. Something near stillness. Her own field flickered with the smallest pulse acknowledging, not asking. Illyra dipped her head. No bitterness, no triumph, just breath. Just space where fire used to burn. Daren, at her side, said under his breath, "Did you ever think they would?" She didn't turn. Her voice was low, certain. "Not until I stopped needing them to." The stars came slowly, as they always did on clear nights, one, then two, then a hush of glitter unfolding across the dark like a breath drawn deep. The garden sighed with warmth, leaves curled gently into sleep, soil still holding the day's heat like a quiet secret. The children's laughter had faded with the dusk. Now there was only the hum, and the stillness. Illyra leaned into him, the side of her body fitting against Daren's as if the space had always been shaped for her. His shoulder was solid beneath her temple, his breath low and even. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The wind stirred her hair, and his hand rose instinctively to steady it, soft, reverent, not like before, not like the touch of ritual instructors or field medics or tribunal guards. This was not correction, not assessment, just presence. Just him. She looked up at the sky, where once she'd tried to lose herself. But now, it didn't feel like escape. It felt like arrival. She remembered how he had once said beautiful, like a revelation, not a kindness. How his gaze had never flinched, even when her scars caught the light. He hadn't erased her shame. He had lit a path through it, and she followed. "I became something new," she whispered. Daren didn't answer, but his hand closed over hers, and in the soft pulse of his touch, she felt the sky open.